Good morning and good afternoon to everyone from wherever you have joined us. It's a pleasure to have a lot of you here with us from Australia and New Zealand and in other parts of the world as well. We expect a full house of more than 300 registrants, and the reason that we started a few minutes late was to allow people to join in. So just to give you a very brief background on what we will go through this 1-hour webinar. The idea is, of course, to give you a brief introduction into what Euraxess is. Then we move on to understand what the individual fellowships are going to bring. And then we have a Marie Curie fellow who will also try to explain his experience, give you some tips. At the end of the 3 presentations, we'll move on to question and answers. So of course, what we want is for all of you to, if you have any questions, just write on your chat and we'll try to answer as much as we can. Having said that, if we do not or are not able to respond to all the questions, since this is being recorded, we'll come back to you with our response in written so that all of your queries are being answered. Okay, so without further ado, what I'll do is I'll share my screen, and also I have a quick poll that will appear on your screen, and I'll give you some time so that you can respond to that poll, okay? Can you see my poll? I can see that people are responding, so I'll also give you 10 more seconds before I close the poll. Last 5 more seconds. Closing in 3, 2, 1, closed. Perfect. So just to give you an introduction, my name is Nishant Shandilya. I am the country representative for Euraxess Australia and New Zealand. You might have been hearing a lot about the word Euraxess and Euraxess Australia and New Zealand. Of course, the idea is Euraxess is a pan-European initiative which is being backed by the European Research Area, which of course is constituted of the European Union, the member states, and the associated nations. The idea behind Euraxess is to support researcher mobility and their career development. Of course, the overarching aim is to enhance scientific collaboration between Europe and rest of the world. So of course, whatever activities or whatever initiative actions that we do are free of charge. Just to give you a very clear idea and not to confuse you a lot, Euraxess has 4 pillars. The first pillar is about jobs and fundings. So if you look at the Euraxess portal, you can find that there are currently about 14,211 research job positions available. So if you are in need to take advantage of any job offers that are currently there, you can also sort them by research areas, you can sort them by countries. This is a possibility. The second possibility within the pillar is about funding. So if you are trying to look at funding that is available, or you are looking for hosting offers, which Susanne will later on also include in her presentation regarding Marie Curie hosts, this is something that is also in Euraxess pillar 1. So Euraxess website or portal has this pillar 1, which is jobs and funding. The second pillar is information and assistance. So there are 14 national portals. So if you are willing to travel to a European country, if you are willing to work in a specific country, you can go to their portal and try to look at specific country informations backed with practical advices. In addition to that, there are also 600 support centers. These are centers which provide free of charge services to researchers who are trying to move and stay abroad. You can have a look at these centers as well if you look at the portal. The third pillar is partnering. The partnering section also allows you to look at what are the host institutions that are there, and you can find members and organizations. As of today, 2 hours ago, there were 93,548 registered members and 17,186 registered organizations and universities. Of course, you can go and find what would be a good match. If you are an institution, you can also try and look at if you want to hire some talented individuals. The last pillar is Euraxess Worldwide. This is where we come in. Euraxess Worldwide is the international arm of Euraxess. So by the map itself, you can see that there are 8 hubs across the world at the moment. US and Canada, Latin America and Caribbean, India, China, Japan, Korea, ASEAN, where Susanne is currently based, and Australia and New Zealand. This is the most nascent, most recent hub, which started in January of this year. So Euraxess and Australia and New Zealand started this year in order to link researchers of Australia and New Zealand with Europe, or reconnect them with Europe. Of course, having said that, all the services that we provide are open to all the nationalities. So if you have any intention to join our membership, you can just go to our website and become a member, and it's free of charge. You can see from the slide itself that we tend to provide news and events, career and funding advice, publications, useful informations. Of course, having said that, news and article in that we generally publish on weekdays an article of interest to researchers, whether it be opportunities, whether it be vacancies, whether it be public policy or research policy related advice or news piece. In terms of our activities, there are 2 specific activities: information and outreach and network animation. Under information and outreach, as I mentioned, we have our portal wherein we provide specific target information to all the researchers, whether it be regarding career advice, career opportunities, funding. So I'll just request, if you want, you could just use the QR code and get to the website to explore what are available there. Of course, we're on social media, on LinkedIn and on Facebook. We generally post once a day on weekdays to keep you informed about any certain funding possibilities or vacancies or news. Similarly, there are newsletters and flash notes. We have 50 weekly flash notes and 4 quarterly newsletters that come directly to your email boxes, provided you are a member, of course. So I encourage you to be a member of Euraxess and Australia and New Zealand, of course. The last thing on information outreach is tutorials. So we tend to provide step-by-step guides on different type of funding. For instance, the Marie Curie Individual Fellowship, we have a step-by-step guide in written as well in the link. Of course, so we'll send all the presentations to all of you. So if you are not able to follow these links, do not worry, we'll be able to provide you the slides. The last part of Euraxess activities is network animation. These are some of the things that we would have done on a normal time, provided this COVID situation was not there. So it would have been institutional visits, information sessions, innovation days, and certain type of workshops and research nights. Having said that, nothing stops us. So what we are trying to do is we're trying to move on to webinars, and for the next foreseeable 3 months, maybe we try to organize different type of webinars. The individual fellowship that you are currently having, then we intend to have a part 2 of the individual fellowship. Similarly, down the line, we intend to have the Frontier Science in Europe for ERC grant, Euraxess Career Development Tools and Services, how to get published in social science and humanities, how to do a PhD or postdoc, and lastly, intersectoral mobility, moving from academia to industry. So these are some of the webinars that we have planned. Of course, we'll keep all of you posted, and we would be very much welcoming to have you again in those webinars. Having said that, this is just the part where we discussed about what Euraxess is. It was to give you a familiarity of what we are doing and what you can avail as a resource for you to participate in any sort of European funding. Okay, so now we move on to the more interesting aspect, wherein Susanne will explain to you about Marie Curie Individual Fellowship, who, where, what, when, and how. So I'll pass the floor to Susanne, but just bear with me so that I can give the presenter right to her.
Thanks, Nishant. I love looking at that picture. I was so much younger, man. Okay, while Nishant is giving me the rights, what I'll be talking to you today about are the MSCA Individual Fellowships. And I have got my slides here, so I hope you can all see them. I assume you can see them. Okay, wonderful. So what I'm talking about today are the MSCA Individual Fellowships, and I'm planning to talk for no longer than 20 minutes because I think I'm the boring person to talk to you. I think it's a lot more interesting for you to hear about one of your peers, a researcher from New Zealand who is currently in Europe, and how he has managed to navigate the application procedure. That'll be a lot more insightful. But let me give you a brief overview about this fellowship, which I personally think is a very exciting one. So first of all, the Commission is a big fan of acronyms, MSCA. So what does it stand for? It stands for Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions. And that, of course, is the lady who's lent her name to this fellowship, Marie Skłodowska-Curie, the lady who did fabulous research in radioactivity. And this fellowship is part of the MSCA. So the MSCA is part of a wider European funding program that you've probably heard about, the Horizon 2020 program. It has a total value of 80 billion euros. It's coming to an end, but it'll be replaced by Horizon Europe just next year. Basically, for you to know, MSCA is the chunk of money that's been reserved for the career development of researchers. So first things first, very important, what are the call dates? The call that we're talking about today has just opened, and it has a closing date of 10th of September, which means you will have about 4 months to get your application in. You will hear later from our fellow that this is not excessive time, which you might think right now, but you really need to structure yourself to have a chance at successfully applying for this fellowship. And what is it? It is a personal fellowship. As I said, this is all about career development. It is a postdoctoral fellowship, and it is also a fellowship which requires you to move. So this is really your opportunity to spend some time in Europe, more explicitly between 1 and 2 years. So it could also be 18 months, but the maximum duration of this fellowship is 24 months. It is a comprehensive career development tool. That means not only will you have the opportunity to hone your scientific expertise, but you'll also be exposed to interdisciplinary skills, how to manage a budget, how to manage a team, how to develop an effective communication and implementation strategy. So it's really meant to take you from where you currently are in your career to the next level. Which topics are funded? And the good news, it's open to all domains of research. So specifically for our audience members today that are from the social sciences and the humanities, there's always a little worry. This is a fellowship that is open to all academic disciplines. What applies here is the so-called bottom-up principle. That means there are no predefined thematic topics. It is entirely up to you as the applicant to choose the research topic that you want to research. So no one tells you what to do. So it's a wonderful opportunity to really develop an idea that you're really excited about and get funding to do it. Who can apply for this fellowship? First of all, very importantly, it's open to all nationalities. So even if you're joining us today from Sydney, but you're actually Chinese or you're Indian or you're from Syria, you're also eligible to apply for this fellowship. It doesn't matter at all. Again, it is open to all academic disciplines, and there's also no age or experience limit. As I said just a couple of minutes ago, this is about career development. So if you can, in your proposal, make a good case for why this fellowship is necessary for you to make the next step in your career development, even if you already have 1 or 2 postdoc fellowships under your belt, again, you are also eligible and very much invited to apply. There are, of course, some eligibility criteria. The first one refers to your qualifications. This fellowship is open to experienced researchers. Now, that means you either need to have a PhD at the time of application, or you need to have at least 4 years of research experience. And I anticipate the question that people wonder, what does that mean? That basically means you need to be able to document that you have spent 4 years of full-time research after the time when you've completed the academic degree, which would have entitled you to continue and read for a PhD. Now, I'm not sure Australia and New Zealand, I'm from Germany. In Germany, that would be a master's degree. So if I had, after my master's degree, spent 4 years carrying out full-time research, I would also be eligible. And how do you document this? I mean, of course, you need to have an employment contract or lab results or publications that you've produced. So the funder is quite flexible there for you to show this, but I'd like to say at this point, the majority of successful applicants do actually have a PhD at the time of application, which is the 10th of September this year. The second eligibility criterion refers to mobility. And I said this is the European Fellowship. It requires you to move to Europe. So you cannot continue somewhere in New Zealand or Australia or the US. I sometimes get that question. You have to go to Europe. At the bottom, you see something that's called mobility rule applies. Now, what does that mean? Oh, sorry. That basically means if you, for example, are currently in Sydney and you would like to do this fellowship in Italy, then you must not have lived in Italy for more than 12 months in the past 3 years prior to the application. So that might apply for some of you that might be European citizens currently in New Zealand. So this is the mobility rule. Next question, where exactly in Europe can you go? And you can see here really a huge variety of countries. On the left are the current members of the European Union. All the big players, of course, are there. And on the right, you see 16 so-called associated countries. All together, they make up the European research area. And the idea is for people to move around. So these are basically the countries that are paying in this big pot of funding that I called Horizon 2020 at the beginning. And again, you might have a question, namely, what about the UK? UK is no longer an EU member state, but UK institutions are still eligible to host a fellow under this call. So you can still go and apply with a UK institution as your European host. The next point is important, and I think our fellow will later elaborate on that. What is unique about this fellowship is that it is a joint effort. And by that, I mean, this is not a fellowship where you just develop a proposal in your own office and then you approach someone in Europe and say, hey, are you interested in this? But you really need to work with your future host, with your future supervisor to make this into, turn this into a tandem effort. What the funder is looking for is that this relationship between the researcher and the host is of mutual benefit. You both need to bring something to the table. Now, your host, of course, need to be an institution or based at an institution that has the right facilities. If you need certain equipment, then of course, the institution that you're picking needs to have that equipment. The supervisor needs to be experienced. He needs to be able to train you and to guide you effectively. But you also need to bring something to the table. Maybe you also have expertise in a specific field that is of value to the host and his or her research. Or maybe you can help create a new link between your current institution in New Zealand or in Australia and your future institution in Europe. So look at this as a joint effort. You and your supervisor will be developing the proposal together and you'll also submit it together. What type of institutions can you choose? And you can choose either a public or a private sector research actor. So of course, the majority of researchers, I think, go to a university or a research institute, but you can also choose to work with a private company in Europe. And what I think is very exciting is the opportunity to build in a secondment. And what the funder is looking for is this extra period of intersectoral mobility. So let's say your main host in Europe is a university, but you want to spend up to 6 months with a private company as part of your fellowship. being able to build in a secondment in your proposal is certainly going to be looked at very favorably by the evaluator. It's not a necessity, so don't get too hung up over it, but it's definitely going to be something that would be in your favor if you manage to do that. So again, this is all about helping you to develop your research career in a comprehensive way, not just in a traditional academic setting, but also carrying out research in a different sector. This is important. What are the evaluation criteria? And you can see, of course, what the funder and the evaluators are looking for is excellence, impact, and implementation. These three criteria are applied to your actual proposal, and you can see on the right, the proposal itself is not that long. It's only 10 pages. Just a little anecdote, it is submitted electronically, and once you submit it, it's turned into a PDF document. So if you have super important information on page 11, the evaluator is not going to see it. But let me explain what these three criteria mean. So excellent, of course, refers to the quality and the innovative aspect of the research that you're proposing. Do not get too concerned right now. You will hear from our fellow what he is doing. And of course, you need to research something that helps to push your academic discipline forward. But don't worry too much about this idea of excellence. Of course, you need to have an innovative idea. And I'm sure all of you are carrying out research and you will have already some gut feeling, you know, what would be a good direction for you to go in. But excellence also refers to this relationship between your future host and you as the researcher that I mentioned at the beginning. So you need to be able to show in your proposal there is a good quality relationship where there is the opportunity for transfer of knowledge, there is training, there is guidance, the quality of the supervision is of that level that is necessary for you to carry out this excellent research. Impact in the middle refers, amongst all, others, also to how good your communication and dissemination strategy is. Now, when you write your proposal, you need to remember the European Commission is one of the most vocal proponents of open science and open access. So within European funded projects, there is an obligation for the funded party to make the research output accessible, not just to your own research community, but to the wider public. So when you design your proposal, this is what impact refers to, how your research results are applicable and available and accessible to a larger community. And implementation, as with any other funding application, refers to how coherent your plan is, what management plan you're describing, what tools and methodology you're choosing. The funder or the evaluator basically wants to see, aha, this person has a plan, they're very clear on the different steps that they need to take, and they will be able to deliver the results that they're proposing within the time frame. This is how these, this is just funded. Sorry, there was a slide that I forgot to put in here. Basically, excellence counts for 50% of the overall assessment. Impact is 30% and implementation is 20%. But there are no individual thresholds. There's an overall threshold of 70%. So overall, you need to meet at least 70%. But again, try to get somewhere into the proximity of 90%. This is kind of the league that you're batting in for this particular fellowship. This is basically just an idea about the numbers, and I just put them here to give you an idea that this is a generous fellowship. That means you have no teaching obligations. You don't have to kind of earn money on the side. You can fully commit yourself to carrying out your research. There's a family allowance built in as well, so you could also bring your spouse or your children if you have any. Success rate. Now, before I click the button here, don't look at this as a deterrent. I'd like you to look at this as a challenge. The success rate is not fantastic, but this is also because there are lots and lots and lots and lots of people applying for it because it is such a fantastically prestigious fellowship that really opens future career doors for you. So don't get too worried about this now. Look at it as an opportunity to be among those 16%, among those around 1,300 people that will be awarded a grant. When will you hear about the outcome? Wow, that looked fancy. Now, the call opened just now and it closes on the 10th of September. And you can expect to hear around February next year, whether you've been successful or not. That you could start your fellowship already by May next year, but you have the opportunity to delay this by up to a year. So it's a very flexible starting date in case you have something that you need to finish up. You might have an employment contract and you can't just walk away from it. This, of course, is all a little bit up in the air right now because of the COVID situation. The Commission is very flexible, and just keep an eye on Nishant's website where he will update you on anything that relates to this. But what is set in stone right now is the closing date, the 10th of September. I'm just going to say a few words about how to get started, but I don't want to say too much because I know our fellow is talking a lot more in detail about that. I think the first step for you to do is to find the application. The application is online. I've also created a QR code here. Don't worry about it too much now. I know Nishant is sharing the slides later on. The reason why I'd like you to look at the call itself is because of the documentation that you find on that page. And here on the right-hand side, you see the guide for applicants. The guide for applicants needs to be your go-to document. That's the thing you read before you go to sleep at night. That's the thing you read when you wake up and you're having your breakfast in the morning, because this is really where you find a lot of information on how to structure your proposal. What I always hear from successful applicants is that they tell me they pasted this next to their screen and they just made sure to cross-reference. Do not ever, under any circumstances, lose out anything. There is something in there, for example, about ethics. Is there an ethical implication about your research? And a lot of applicants think, nah, there's not. So they just don't put it in their application. You will not get graded for that. You need to put in, no, there are no ethical implications with my research proposal. So again, the guide for applicants should be your reading material throughout the drafting procedure. Secondly, of course, you need to have an idea. How to get an idea? You already have an idea, I'm sure you do. If you don't, talk to your peers, talk to your supervisor, talk to the people in your lab, the people in your research group, talk to people that you meet at a conference, and just develop this idea. And then thirdly, you need to find a host. This is super important. I'm sure we get some advice in a minute. Personal contacts always work best. I mean, it's just human nature. If people that you've never heard of email you, you're not so much inclined to reply to them. So maybe your supervisor at your current institution knows someone in Europe. Maybe you've met someone at a conference. Maybe you keep citing someone in your own research output. Just contact these people. But there are two online databases that I'd like to recommend to you. The first one is the Euraxess portal, and Nishant has already mentioned that in the beginning. On the Euraxess portal, you find something here called Find Hosting. And I just looked this morning, there's over 300 hosting offers right now. So these are European institutions that are actively looking to host a fellow. So they're looking for someone with a specific profile, with a specific research area. By all means, look at this first. And secondly, we have the Net for Mobility Plus, one of these wonderful European acronyms. But basically, this is a group of experts that are spread all throughout Europe, and their job is it to consult people like yourselves. And they have a wonderful website, and on this you will find EUIs, expression of interest. Again, a whole list of institutions that are currently looking actively to identify people that want to do their individual fellowship at their institution. So lots of information is available. Nishant asked me to also mention something. And there might be some amongst our audience today that are not actually looking to go to Europe, but you are thinking about hosting a European fellow at your own institution. And again, this is what makes this fellowship so fantastic. It promotes mobility in both ways. The European fellowship is about you going to Europe, but we also have the so-called global fellowships. And the global fellowships would be European fellows that come and spend some time with you in Australia or in New Zealand. These fellowships offer the opportunity for Europeans to spend up to 2 years with you, wherever you are. There is a compulsory or mandatory 1-year return phase to Europe. So for you, for the European fellowships that I was talking about in the last 20 minutes, there is no bonding. There is no nothing mandatory. After the 2 years, you're free as a bird. You can go wherever you want. For the global fellows, if you host them in Australia, they need to go back to Europe for 1 year. Again, it's fully funded, no cost to you or your institution. So a wonderful opportunity. What would you need to do to find a fellow? Again, you might have a network in Europe already. You could say, hey, you know, we've been working together. Do you have a PhD or a postdoc that wants to come to me here in Melbourne for this fellowship? And you could also use our Euraxess portal to advertise your hosting offer. I've just put here at the end, I think, where you find more information. And don't worry, you don't need to go through this now. The key message is there's lots and lots and lots of information available. And I've put this here in highlight. Read this. And what you will find there when you click on this later today or tomorrow is a guidebook. We have colleagues that have taken the trouble, they're in Luxembourg, and they've taken the trouble to go through the evaluator comments of a whole year, and they've basically copy pasted all the good comments, all the bad comments. So this again is a wonderful resource for you to make yours a strong proposal. Now this is the end of my presentation. I will stop sharing my screen now. There we go.
Perfect.
And that's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Susanne. It was really insightful, and I'm sure the attendees had a lot of questions. I can see that the questions have been pouring in our question section. We'll take them after Terry presents his insights. So I'll pass on the floor to Dr. Terry Yang. He's currently working in CSIRO Energy. He's from New Zealand, but he has done his education here in Australia. So a perfect person to tell you, because he recently returned back from his fellowship in May of 2019. Terry, I'll just give you the presenter rights so that you can share your screen.
Yeah, thank you, Nishant. I've got to find where I can share screen. So yes, okay, show my screen. There we go. All right, I'll run the presentation. Okay, so firstly, thank you, Nishant and Susanne. Susanne, I think both of you guys presented very excellent, excellent talks on this Marie Curie Fellowship. So for my talk, just ensure everyone hear me. This is Nishant. Yes, everyone can hear me correctly. Is that right? Yes, checking, and everyone can see my screen just before I start. Yes, all good. Okay, so good. So everyone can hear me, and yes. So okay, so let's start. So just a bit about my background. Just move this out of the way. Okay, so just a bit about my background. So basically, yes, I was born in Taiwan and I grew up in New Zealand, and so then I moved over to Australia, in Sydney in Australia, to do my Bachelor of Engineering and PhD in Photovoltaic Engineering at the University of New South Wales. And then I applied for a Marie Curie Fellowship so this was the application in June 20, so started in September 2016. And then I started in June 2017, which went over to May 2019. And after that, I returned to Australia to start my fellowship at CSIRO Energy in Newcastle, and where I have been since August 2019. So just a bit about me. I have 9 years of experience in solar cell research. I've co-authored 23 journal articles, and I've had a total funding, funding with grants and honors and awards of 240,000 euros in total. Okay, so just moving on. Okay, so I applied for the Marie Curie Individual Fellowship. So there's a couple of reasons why I wanted to apply. So back when I graduated in 2016 for PhD in solar engineering. So I always wanted to work in Europe because Europe's was one of the top regions for solar cell research, especially in Germany, Switzerland, and the UK. And it was just a very good opportunity, and I really wanted to travel in Europe, for example, because I have a bucket list of countries that I wanted to visit whilst I was there. So I thought the Marie Curie Fellowship is a an excellent opportunity, given that you could basically get funded to work in Europe as a researcher for up to 2 years. And also, it's another reason was that it was very good for my CV or anyone's CV if you actually, when you finish your PhD, to be able to do a postdoc somewhere overseas where you can actually gain experience with working with different institutions, working with different cultures, etc. And before coming back and doing a more permanent, finding a more permanent position. Often you can find postdocs will usually perhaps do 2 or even 3 placements before they find like a tenure track position towards an associate professor or professorship. And so yes, so this is again great opportunity. And so when I found my host, which is in EPFL in Switzerland, so they're quite my host laboratory is quite well known for their work in solar cells. So they're one of the top research institutions for solar energy research. So with all these I guess aspects, it's just there was a no-brainer as to why I decided to apply for a Marie Curie Fellowship. Okay, check everything's still there. Okay, so moving on. So I'll just get this out of the screen for a second. Sorry about that. Okay, so also I've just basically prepared 10 top tips for my personal tips on how to apply for a Marie Curie Fellowship. And okay, so first one is again, so most of you out there, I think for 100 of you currently listening on the seminar, the first thing is you want to start early, and that's very important. As you heard from Susanne, the deadline this year is the 10th of September, so that's about 5 months away. And it's actually, time flies by really quickly if you're not careful. And you got to also realize that many institutions also have their internal deadlines, which is usually 1 week or 2 weeks before that. So usually want to have your proposal ready for them to read and to check even before the actual official European deadline of the 10th of September. Okay, so the second tip quite an important one is, and as Susanne mentioned, is to find a host. So you have to find both a host supervisor, which is usually the PI, which is a professor, a lecturer, and also you need to find a host institution. So you generally like either a university, a research institution, or a company. So again, so this is, I guess for most of you, this is probably one of the first difficult steps in applying for these Marie Curie Fellowships. And so I can talk about how I applied for my fellowship. So back in 2016, I actually attended a European conference to present some of my work. And at the conference, I found a professor that I was quite interested in working with which is the professor in Switzerland at EPFL. So obviously I went to his talk, a few emails, had a bit of a chat with him afterwards, and basically asked, would you have any positions available for postdocs? And at the time, the professor actually said, unfortunately not, we don't have any positions. However, would you like to apply for a Marie Curie Fellowship? Because we had a Marie Curie fellow from last year. So she applied and she was successful, and she's working in my lab now. So yeah, we're happy to host another one this year. Would you like to apply for that? So I was like, sure, fantastic. Yes, please send me the details. and need to introduce me to anyone from your lab so they can also help with all the administration, and that would be great. So again, so after leaving the conference, we had sort of discussed the project a little bit at the conference, but also sort of online via Skype and email. So yeah, so sort of started off from there. Of course, there are other ways you can find a host. You could probably, if your current supervisor, for example, has any sort of connections with professors or associate professors over there in Europe, or even companies, you can probably get your professor here to help introduce you to someone, to one of the contacts over in Europe, and then see if you would like to apply or suggest that you apply for a Marie Curie fellowship. And okay, so that's sort of ways to sort of find a suitable host. And now I've listed a lot of dot points. You see all these dot points, and these are quite important in terms of what your host can provide for you if you want to apply. So obviously the first thing is to discuss the project with your host. And so the second was that your host would probably direct you, or your PI would, to the research office from their university, for example, which will often provide, in addition to the sort of the guidelines, the general guidelines to the application, they also provide a lot of internal information on how to apply, and sort of what applications and what documents you need, what sort of other material is required. And then also, this is also things like postdocs and secretaries your professor might introduce you to, and they're people that can help you sort of speed along the process. Perhaps they've gone through the similar processes before of applying for grants, so they're usually good people to talk to. And the professor should also provide a short CV, which is another section in the proposal, which is also very important. And again, your post professor or PI can provide secondments or overseas institutions. So again, this is sort of what was explained by Susanne. Sort of, these are basically for generally around, I think, 2 months to 3 months, kind of like an exchange in your 2-year period of a different host institution, usually in Europe. So this would promote cross-sectional mobility, and also sort of interaction and collaboration. And also, a PI should also provide feedback once you have written your first draft of your proposal. So this is very important. And as a final note, I just want to say that your host PI professor will be very busy, so try to minimize their workload. And yes, read through the and yes, just make sure you're all prepared before you sort of go have a sort of chat with them. So just not to waste their time. Okay, and on to the third sort of tip is, if you can, possibly find an existing proposal. Perhaps your professor has passed like Marie Curie fellows, successful fellows. So that's probably a very good idea to start off with. Again, a successful proposal is something over probably 90, although something over 85 would probably also be very good. And this just gives you like a sort of an easy sort of template to work with, and to write your own proposal. And on to topic tips number 4 and 5. Again, choose. I want to, if you're choosing a topic that you're familiar with, it doesn't necessarily have to be your exact PhD topic. For example, if you're working on, say, nickel metal hydride batteries, and then you wanted to work on lithium-ion batteries, that's perfectly fine. They're all sort of related in the same field. But for example, if you're working on battery technology, but you want to, say, for example, you want to apply something like animal research, then then that is probably not a good idea, because the fields are just too dissimilar. So what happens is, when it comes to the reviewers or the examiners of the proposal, when they come to read it, and for each proposal there will be three examiners, then they'll say, okay, what is the reason for this particular individual to, so what are his background, and what is his expertise or her expertise to be able to carry out this research that they have proposed. And if you start off with, say, if your expertise is bachelor research, and then you apply for something like animal research or something, so it's something different, then obviously it's just not going to make sense. So do apply for a topic that's quite similar to something that you've done for your PhD, or if you're a postdoc, then something similar to what you're working on at the moment. And yes, so this brings me on to number 5. So when writing up your proposal, please make the topic understandable to the readers or reviewers who may not be in your field. And I can't stress this enough. Just because if you're reading an abstract, or for example, if you're reading the introduction in the excellence section of the proposal, most researchers, including me sometimes, we get sort of lost in our fields, and we can be sometimes so specific and so technical that we tend to forget that others don't really have a clue of what we're talking about. So my suggestion is start broadly, a very simple topic. What is the big picture, and what will your research or your 2-year research plan contribute to the topic or the field, and what will that eventually be able to do for society? For example, I can say for my research field, I go, oh, current solar cells in industry and the world are around 20% efficient, but through my research, there's a possibility that we can improve all that efficiency from 20% to 30%. So all the solar cells in the world will be able to have 30% instead of 20% at around the same cost. So that's sort of something big or sort of impactful that your research will be able to will be able to do, and that's also part of the impact section. Okay. So just to check, was there a question there? Someone raised a question? No. No. Okay. Okay, so for tips number 6, 7, 8, more to do with the presentation. Just want to make sure that for number 6, to make sure your presentation stands out. So you want to, again, you can add some pictures into your presentation, or also cite some, say, more recent up-to-date literature. That's also very, very important. And make sure your graphs are also very neat and clean and also correct. You want to, for example, your axes to read correctly. You don't want the text to be too small that the examiner cannot see that. And number 7, you want to make sure you answer all points in the proposal. This was brought up by Susanne. This is very, very important. So, for example, there's always a sort of a section. So in the excellence, there's an excellence section and impact and implementation, and there's sort of like it's 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.11, 1.12, etc. So make sure you answer all those points. Because I remember one of the points is, I think, to do with gender issues. So, for example, even if your research doesn't tackle any gender issues, you should mention that, saying, for example, my research does not relate to any gender issues, but for example, the university is careful in its management of sort of gender equality, and also things to do with sort of like other sort of, so just mention something so that you can so that examiners, when they see that, they can actually tick off the box, because one of their marking criteria is to be able to tick off each of the bullet points. And if you actually don't have any of those, if you don't actually answer or you miss some of those points, then they can't actually give you a tick for those boxes. And number 8, again, so towards the end, you want to find people to read your proposal, to check over it, to provide comments and correct any errors. And it's very important to make sure there are no spelling mistakes or grammatical errors, just because it's not like you're submitting for a journal article. There's no room for reviews to come back and then you rewrite it again. This is the final thing. So once you submit the proposal, that's it. You don't get to, you don't get it back, and you get to change any mistakes. So it's very important that the presentation at the very end, the very last copy that you submit, is the final copy with no mistakes. Okay, and number 9, when it comes to the submission, so I guess during sort of before the 10th of September, just so you can submit early, because so I'd say at least a few days before, possibly even up to a week. And you can do this you can submit on the online system, and you can submit this multiple times, and only the most recent upload will be the one that that gets submitted. So this avoids any issues. For example, up to the last hour of the deadline, if everyone submits, then the online system or the internet will jam with the online system. So you don't want that to happen. And finally, don't be upset if your proposal was not successful. As you saw on the graphics that Susanne provided, the success rate on average is 14%. For some of them, they're even lower. I saw something like 11%, and some were higher, like 17. But even 14%, that's 1 in 6, 1 in 7. So that means the majority of applicants will not actually be successful. And remember, you're already competing with the best sort of PhDs around the world, PhDs and postdocs around the world. So it's again, it's already sort of very, very tough. And so that brings me to the end of my my talk. So I hope some of the points that I've given will help writing your proposal, and best of luck.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining in. And you might be seeing my screen at the moment. And herein we have provided the contact details and, of course, the sign up for membership. Do get in touch with us on Facebook or on LinkedIn. And hopefully we were able to give you some insights in terms of what Marie Curie Individual Fellowship brings to you. Of course, at the end of the webinar, when you exit, you will get a survey of 3 questions, yes or no questions. Please respond to them so that we understand if you want to have a follow-up webinar, which would go in much details in terms of how you would be writing your proposal. So thank you very much for joining in. I must say a big thank you to Susanne and Terry for joining in as well, and all the attendees who were part of this webinar. It was an interesting experience for all of us, and hopefully we'll get to organize similar type of information sessions in the future as well. Thank you very much for joining in.
Thanks, Nishant. Bye, Terry. Bye, Nishant.
All right, thank you, Nishant. Yeah, thanks, Susanne. Yep.